Well, hello everyone. Hope you're doing well. And as always, thank you so much for joining us for our weekly message here at DRC. And again, and additionally, as always, if you're out of town, thank you for watching this and staying connected with us. If you're not feeling well, hopefully you bounce back. Either way, we hope you're back in this room with us as soon as possible. That's the ideal, is for us to be able to worship and have fellowship, and like we talked about last week, and to do it together, all in the same space. So, all right, so when it comes to things going on this week, we have one more equip class. We're going to talk about, is it ever okay to lie? We're supposed to be honest and not lie. It's one of the 10 commandments, but is there ever situations for the greater good? So I think we had a great conversation last week on, of all things, capital punishment and euthanasia. So come join us Monday night, 7 o'clock for another good conversation. Wednesday night is Prayer House, and the women's Bible studies have wrapped up already, but the guys are going to meet Friday morning at 7 o'clock. So, all right, so there is some good news when you look outside. Things are getting green. You know, we planted some flowers in our backyard and some plants and some grass. So I've been kind of happy for all the rain that we've gotten, but I'm happy that the sun is out. It's heating up. So things are taking root and starting to grow. That's what happens every spring. And so it seems appropriate that this is the season we're talking about growing deeper roots. Where I grew up, we say roots. Roots. We've been talking about growing deeper roots. And, we talked about worship. How can our worship be both vertical and horizontal and not just one or the other? How can we grow deeper roots in our fellowship? And we talked about last week. And this weekend, we're talking about our discipleship. How do we grow deeper roots in our discipleship? How do we grow in our discipleship or our followership, if you want to think about it that way? That enables, again, the transformation of our heart. Or, think about it this way, how to grow in our knowledge to enable the transformation of our heart, or our obedience. So where is your default on that? When you think of disciple, do you think of getting smarter, or do you think of becoming more obedient? Okay? Typically, historically, I think, in the American church, we have equated knowledge with maturity. But unfortunately, I don't know if that's the best case, best argument. There are plenty of really old, smart believers who are not always mature. They're not always rooted. When the storms of life come, they oftentimes don't fare well when the hard things come. Or maybe they just have some attitudes. And so knowledge does not always equal heart transformation. The reality is, I think our obedience is the better mark of maturity. Not what you know, but what you do. And sometimes even younger believers may exhibit more signs of maturity or trust than older believers might. John Maxwell said this: "We are educated in the church way beyond the level of our obedience." Get that? We are educated in the church way beyond the level of our obedience. I could put it this way: we often know more than we do. Okay, so let's be careful not to equate knowledge with maturity. I think another mistake that we might make when we think about what discipleship is, we might think that discipleship or obedience is our path to holiness. And I'd vehemently disagree. You are holy because you're forgiven by the grace of the cross. Your so-called level of holiness in God's standing or God's eyes cannot fluctuate according to your behavior. That's the beauty of the cross and the gospel. The Holy Spirit dwells in you. You are holy, you are pure, you are forgiven. The challenge, as we always say, is for your behavior to catch up to what you already are. So today this weekend, we're going to move from shared experiences of worship and fellowship the last 2 weeks to the commitment that's required of us as an individual follower of Jesus. And again, this helps define what it means to be a disciple. It helps. It doesn't totally define it. So let's just jump right in. Luke 9:23. Jesus said, "Then he said to all of them, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me." So if we're going to talk about discipleship, we got to lean into some of these passages, followership. Jesus is saying, if you want to be my disciple, if you want to be my follower, you have to deny yourself. You have to take up your cross. Now, deny, it's not just giving up stuff. It really is the displacement of the self as the center. It is more of a mindset than an action. All right, our actions flow from our mindset. So it's changing the way we think and perceive, or denying ourself as the center, putting him as the center. It means saying no to our will, but saying yes to God's desires for us. So, and then this idea of denying yourself and to take up your cross, or take up their cross. Their kind of implies ownership, doesn't it? In the Roman world, those carrying a cross were already seen as dead to their old life. Again, Jesus uses this metaphor for a total or even a sacrificial commitment to him. So yeah, denying and bearing our cross. And then daily, cross daily. Take up their cross daily and follow me. It's not just a one-time emotional decision. Discipleship is a repetitive daily choice to follow Jesus. Jesus spoke, of the narrow and wide gates. Narrow is the gate to him, wide is the path to destruction, or wide is the road, and narrow is the path even after you go through the narrow gate. So even after you come to faith, there's still a narrowness in how we walk. Later on in Luke 14, Jesus said this, "Whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple." And that word cannot, there is no casual version of Christianity. There is no Christian light. Jesus, talked kind of blatantly about not being a lukewarm Christian. I'd rather you be hot or cold, but when you're trying to walk with a foot in both worlds, that doesn't work. There is no casual version of Christianity. So at this point, we're only a few minutes in, and you might be thinking, time out. The gospel is supposed to be good news, and this doesn't sound like all that good news. This word deny and crosses and cannot. What about words like freedom, joy, and rest? Well, there's plenty of that as well. John 8:31 through 32. "If you hold to my teaching," another translation will say, "abide in my word." So if you hold to my teaching or abide in my word, you are really my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That's a phrase, obviously, hopefully you've heard of before. If you hold to my teaching, again, going back to the original language, it's hold that also means to abide, remain, or dwell. It's not just knowing the words, but having them live inside you. So again, when we abide in his word, that's when we're holding on to his teaching. It's an attitude of the heart. It's not an action, it's an attitude of the heart. To be my disciple, you must abide in his word, the truth. There is no other way to be a follower of Jesus. The word made flesh is to abide, or to live in, to dwell, or to make your home in his word or his truth. So what it means is welcoming it, bringing it home with you, and living with it so continuously that it becomes part of your life as a permanent influence. So it's the word abiding in you is going to change, and that will set us free. That phrase, set you free. There's a lot of power in those three words. This is the result, again, of this abiding in the word and the truth of Jesus, the works of his freedom in our life through his truth. So when we soak in and we live in the abiding of his truth, then we are going to be free. The freedom Jesus spoke of doesn't come from academic pursuit, like we talked about, but from, again, abiding in his word and being his disciple, his follower, by obeying, yes, but also by trusting. We're going to hit on that word trust a little bit later. I found this quote: there is nothing like the freedom we can have in Jesus. No money can buy it. No status can obtain it. No words can earn it, and nothing can match it. It is tragic that not every Christian experiences this freedom, which can never be found except by abiding in God's truth. I really butchered that. Hopefully tomorrow when we're live, I do a better job. All right. Let me read it again. There's nothing like the freedom we can have in Jesus. No money can buy it. No status can obtain it. No works can earn it, and nothing can match it. It is tragic that not every Christian experiences this freedom, which can never be found except by abiding in God's truth. Again, that abiding is in your heart. More on this idea of being set free. Ironically, the so-called bondage of following Jesus' commands leads us to the ultimate freedom. Freedom from the power of sin and freedom from the weight of trying to navigate life on your own. That goes back to the word trust, when we trust. There's a connection, the passages in Luke, it's focused on the death of the old self, taking up the cross. But in John, it's a focus on the new life that follows and the freedom through this truth. And together they show us that the cost of discipleship is high. There's a cost to it. But the reward is freedom from our striving. So the reward is way bigger. Now I want to make a side note here, just to kind of point out something that I think is important, that discipleship is not sin management. So what is sin management? Sin management, kind of critically defined, it describes the broken and exhausting way that many Christians try to live out their faith. It's what happens when the Christian life becomes primarily about trying not to sin or to live in obedience with a white-knuckled discipline, if you will, or right behavior, rather than trusting God and living from your new identity. So we need to be careful we just don't fall into sin management, focus on our behavior. We could focus on our behavior all day long. We're just going to be frustrated. We need to be focused on who Christ is and what he's done for us. Where is your focus? Why sin management doesn't work? It results in a striving that never feels like it's done enough to please God. Living from our forgiven new identity results in a trust that experiences his full pleasure. Our motives as followers of Christ will keep us in unresolved sin and immaturity, trying harder or wearing masks, just faking it, or it will allow us to be set free as Jesus taught by recognizing the real depth of his grace, the real depth of his forgiveness, and this new identity that happens when we truly understand the depth of the cross and his grace. So what breaks the power of sin instead? The antidote to sin management isn't trying harder, it's trusting God and even others with who you really are, letting yourself be fully known and fully loved. Sin management is a treadmill of performance that actually keeps people stuck in sin, while a grace-based identity, I am already who God says I am in Christ, is what produces real transformation. Again, it's about transformation and not behavior. So if you're still not convinced, thank you for that little side note on sin management. But if you're still not convinced or still feeling a little bit overwhelmed by the challenge, I have another verse that might be helpful at this point. It's Matthew 11:28 through 30, Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." What did Jesus mean by all this? In one way, it's a contrast of the Pharisees' burden Jesus was speaking to a people crushed under the weight of religious law. Hundreds of detailed rules, regulations, and obligations that were impossible to keep. His burden, Jesus' burden, by contrast, is one of grace, not exhaustive rule following. And we might not have the same outward Old Testament religious law, but we still fall into the trap of religion and thinking our behavior needs to be right for us to be right with God. The yoke metaphor, a yoke is a farming tool fitted for an ox for their plowing. But you may not know this, rabbis in the day also used yoke as a metaphor, often for following their interpretation of the law and even their lifestyle. So rabbis weren't the only one that you would use yoke, but they say to their students, you need to follow my interpretation or my lifestyle. So when Jesus is basically saying is follow my way of understanding God's law instead. Because his yoke fits well. It isn't harsh or ill-fitting. So what makes it light? My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Well, a couple things. First is our motivation changes. His way is driven by love and a relationship with God, not a fear of punishment. A lot of people live in the fear of punishment, or this striving to earn or re-earn God's favor or his blessing. So our motivation changes and that makes it light. He carries it with you. He carries it with us. The yoke imagery implies two oxen sharing a load. Jesus bears it alongside us with the help. That's the role of the Holy Spirit. Another one is it better aligns with our human nature. Jesus summarized the law as loving God and others. It's Matthew 22, which is simpler in principle than following, black and white hundreds of rules. It's about rest, not striving. The emphasis here is on receiving from him and not achieving for him. We need to do better at receiving from him, not just thinking I have to achieve for him. The deeper point, you might want to put it this way. Jesus wasn't saying the Christian life is easy or without cost. Again, he implores us to take up our cross. But the lightness is relational. And here's a great phrase. A burden carried in love feels different from one carried in dread. Our obedience is carried in love, not out of dread. A burden carried in love feels different than one carried in dread. It's essentially an offer for spiritual relief to a people that were exhausted by a religion without relationship. And again, it goes back to that abiding and that relationship element. What about the cost of non-discipleship? We could talk about the cost of discipleship and what that looks like. But there is a cost to non-discipleship. An author named Dallas Willard pointed out some of these things. The cost of non-discipleship. Your soul's formation goes elsewhere. If you're not being shaped by Jesus, you're still being shaped. It's either going to be culture, your past. A lot of people are unfortunately influenced by their past. Present fears, even just habits, all those things. The question isn't whether you'll be formed, it's but by what are you going to be formed. So your character is going to be formed. You get to decide by what or by who. Another cost of non-discipleship is that you remain stuck in what you're trying to escape, whether it be anger, lust, anxiety, worry, doubt. There's a long list of ugly things there. Bitterness, different fears. These just don't require forgiveness. They require transformation. And without discipleship, you might confess the same sins over and over again without the inner change that really brings freedom. Another cost of non-discipleship is you miss the life Jesus actually promised. Jesus said he came to give life in the full. That's John 10:10. Most Christians, unfortunately, are not experiencing this abundance, this fullness, not because Jesus failed to deliver, but because they never engaged in the training that makes such a life possible. So what are you being trained by? What are you intentionally doing? It might be in a Monday night equip class. It might be going to church. We have a Bible study that's included in the worship guide notes. Different Bible studies that are offered. Even Wednesday night prayer house. What are the opportunities that you're not taking advantage of that you could be trained in the disciple? Relational and moral damage continues. Another cost of non-discipleship. Without the slow work of your character formation, you continue hurting people, making destructive choices, and not living the life that truly is available to you. The cost is suffered by you and, unfortunately, those around you. And the last one, the last cost of non-discipleship. You become unable to do what Jesus commanded. He tells us to love your enemies. Don't worry. Don't be anxious. Words like rest and experience joy. Most Christians see these as really unrealistic ideals, but they are meant to be an actual description of a transformed person. And only discipleship or growing in our followership is going to get us there. The summary, what casual Christianity cost you, non-discipleship, cost us an abiding peace, a life penetrated throughout by love, a faith that sees everything in the light of God's overriding governance for our good. I love that one. Hopefulness, joy, and the power to do what is right and the power to refrain from what is wrong. In other words, everything Jesus promised us is what non-discipleship cost you. If I could put this word discipleship or followership, try to explain it in 2 words when it's all said and done, I think I'd go with the words obedience and trust. We need to live lives that are obedient, but we need to trust Him. When we trust Him, it's easier to live a life of obedience. And here's the thing. You kind of want to know a secret? We actually like structure because we desperately need it. You can see this played out in what we might want to call first-generation Christians. When people have walked in the ways of the world and they've experienced the destructiveness of their decisions and then they come to faith, they are the ones that often embrace structure because they so badly need it. They knew what their life was like without it. So the guardrails, if you will, are healthy for us. And sometimes the people who appreciate them the most are the ones that didn't have them in the past. In fact, Psalm 119:97 says, I love your law. I meditate on it all day long. That's a heart attitude towards what God's desires are for us. Another version puts it this way, I love your instructions. I think about them all day long. Freedom and safety are found in our discipleship. Freedom and safety are found in our following Christ's desires for us. I'll end with just one more analogy that you may have heard, or maybe you haven't. Imagine after World War II, you're in Germany, and Germany is littered with 1 million landmines. And you want to go outside to play, but you don't know exactly where the landmines are. But a team of soldiers and a bunch of people, they have cleared a huge field, and they put a fence around it. And they said, you can run around all day long in this field, and you will be safe. There's no landmines. These are the guidelines, if you will. And you can run and you can enjoy being outside with no fear whatsoever. But if you cross that fence, you go outside of God's guidelines. You are not being a follower. You're not being a disciple at that point. You are wanting to experience the freedom of the world. You are putting yourself in the harm's danger. That's when you're going to hit the landmine. So it goes back to, I love your law. I meditated on it all day long. Again, or I love your instructions. I think about them all day long because they're the best. They are good for us. So just 3 questions to wrap up our time. How do you deny yourself? How do you carry your cross? What fleshly desires do you say no to? And if you can't think of any, then consider why that's your answer. Are you just acquiescing to your fleshly desires? How do you deny yourself? We deny ourselves some things, like I know I shouldn't eat all that food or sugar or whatever it is. And maybe that's your answer, but maybe there's other things in a moral realm kind of question. How do you deny yourself? How are you pursuing transformation? Apart from watching this video, or hopefully attending on a Sunday morning right here in this room at 10 a.m., what are you doing to pursue transformation, discipleship? How is your followership seen? And the last question is, what do you need to trust God with? What do you need to trust God with? Discipleship is about trust. First and foremost, it's about the trust that the cross gives us new identity, but it's also a trust with our current situation. So discipleship is more than obedience. It's also about how do we trust. So what do you need to trust God with in your followership of him? So, well, again, thank you so much for joining us. Hope this resonates. Take care. God bless.